I'll be honest with you guys, I was kind of phasing in and out of paying attention to this fight. From what I remember, Rosa got dropped in the first round by Lansberg, and from there, something switched in Rosa's head to where she was like, I'm not standing with this girl. And she just kept taking her down over and over and over again. She had a dicey moment when she kneed Lina in the head while Lina was grounded, which made the fight interesting for all of like 3 minutes before it turned into a majority decision win for Rosa. After Lina showed next to no urgency to get up from bottom. She just kept getting flattened out over and over and over again. Didn't try to hip heist, didn't try to shrimp out. At moments, it looked like she just accepted the bottom position. To put things into perspective, these were two ranked fighters opening the card under guys like Muhammad Makhachev and Malcolm Gordon, who were not even ranked in their divisions. For this fight, Malcolm Gordon came out with a black belt over his fight kit during the walkout. It seemed like he really wanted to send a message about his grappling. And when the bell sounded, he came in like a bat out of hell, just pressuring forward and blitzing Mokaev. Mokaev tried to throw a few body kicks in punching range, got punished for it, got cracked against the cage, and decided that he was done striking and took Gordon down. Gordon fought out, tried to scramble again, got put up against the fence, and taken down again. And for the most part, Mokaev just suffocated him on the ground, put Gordon's head up against the cage and stacked his hips, which functionally shut down Gordon's guard because he had no room to operate. Mokaev would pass guard, but Gordon would just put up a knee shield and half guard to create some space and retain his guard. In the second round, I believe, at the beginning, Mokaev gained too much respect from Gordon and just came out to style on him. Threw like 8 different kicks, the 2-touch jumping spinning back kick, a wheel kick, the hook kick, some flying stuff. And when Gordon felt emasculated enough to close distance and do something about it, Mokaev just took him down again, and we got a replay of the first round all over. At one point, Gordon reversed position, and Mokaev threw up a triangle, I think. I don't know if I'm getting it reversed, but Gordon did a pretty good job of stacking Mokaev's hips and fighting his other arm in to neutralize that threat of the triangle choke, and ended up on top of Mokaev at the end and put Mokaev in a little bit of danger. Yeah, he had him stuck in a nasty neck crank for a few seconds there before the bell sounded to signify the end of the second round. The story of the fight was basically Gordon rushing in, Mokaev ducking under and taking him down right along the cage, where he was able to essentially neutralize Gordon's guard. However, the biggest moments of the fight though were they seem to have been made by Gordon, other than the armbar. He cracked Mokaev in the first round, got a nasty neck crank in the second, and suplexed him in the third, which was. It's always fun to see somebody who's the big grappler go for a ride. During the walkouts, when he came out with the black belt, I was getting ready to clown on him if he got absolutely out-grappled. But he managed to, hold his own for the most part. It was just that Mokaev was that little bit better, and it showed when he was able to secure an armbar after almost losing the back mount because he was riding too high up on Gordon's back. The way that this fight played out, though, it did not warrant Mokaev being a 12-1 favorite. Dobson caught a few of Petrosyan's kicks early on, which was a trend throughout the fight, and it didn't seem to deter Petrosyan. He just kept kicking, and Dobson failed to kick with the kicker, which I think would have really benefited him. There was a lot of weird feinting from the two, and at moments they just had a manly agreement to just both crash forward and throw like two drunk uncles at a tense family cookout. Both guys just stood straight up when they were exchanging, especially Dobson, and it just looked pretty goofy aesthetically. But they were throwing with some heat. There weren't many setup punches or like half-hearted jabs to build combinations, just pure swinging and banging from the two. At the end of the first round, Dobson was able to capitalize off a missed kick from Petrosyan, who didn't care and just kept throwing naked kicks with no setup anyway, despite being taken down for a few seconds. To his detriment though, Dobson barely tried to punish Petrosyan for that. He would catch like 5 kicks in a row and not even threaten a takedown or try to punch Petrosyan while he was on one leg off balance. However, after a grappling exchange late in the second round, Petrosyan must have tweaked his knee or something, but he did the stanky leg for a second, and then his body language and striking got really slow and sloppy, and he just gave up on his in and out movement that he was relying heavily on in the first 2 rounds before the injury, well, supposed injury, and just started initiating extensive, reckless exchanges in the pocket, which favored AJ Dobson, who was able to largely roll and slip these punches, but aesthetically it looked good for Petrosyan because he was able to out-volume AJ, who wasn't able to capitalize on how bold Arman got in the pocket. Arman would just give him all these openings, and Dobson would do nothing about it. You know, he'd slip and roll these punches and kind of stand there, kind of like Bobby Green, you know. Pretty good middleweight banger. Maybe finally the middleweight division will stop being one of the worst middle divisions in the UFC, but hey, you never know. All right, this fight guaranteed at least one Muslim to lose in Abu Dhabi, so I'm not sure how keen the locals were on this matchup, but right off the get, Abubakar shot right into the guillotine. I'm just going to call him Manap, which is easier to say, less syllables, and it's what the rest of the AKA crew calls him. So Manap shot right into a guillotine, and I'm going to call him Gadzhi. Gadzhi forced Abubakar to carry his weight and fed him some knees on his way up. One underrated skill from a lot of fighters in the Khabib camp is their ability to control distance, and Manap did a pretty good job of that, largely slipping a lot of Gadzhi's strikes. Gadzhi was able to use that head movement though from Manap to shoot in and securing a takedown briefly, but then almost got swept by an elevator sweep before jumping on the guillotine and ending up on bottom, which was just a low IQ moment. The second round had a pretty good start to it for Manap, but man, these knees to the grounded opponents, Manap just lost all of his brain cells and need yet another downed opponent for the card, although it didn't look like it had much of an impact. Poor Gadzhi, the man had two back-to-back fights where he suffered a knee to the head while down. I agree with the referee about not taking a point though. That knee didn't look like it really did any effective damage, so the point deduction wouldn't have been warranted in my opinion. But Manap showed off some slick grappling with great back control after reversing multiple takedown attempts from Gadzhi, who just got gassed. And he almost got Manap at one point. Manap almost got caught in a TP choke, which would have been one of the most hilarious and ridiculous submissions in the UFC if it was finished. But after getting out of that choke, Manap was able to largely shut down most of Gadzhi's scramble and submission attempts, but didn't do much with the control. He just opted to lay on top of him. I think it was at the end of the second round, I believe. He was literally just laying on top of him. But honestly, where do these Eagles MMA guys learn how to control distance so well? And why has nobody ever brought it up? Man's had a beautiful counter at the end of the third round and dropped a very fatigued Gadzhi. Manap's hands have come a long way from a few years ago. You know, I believe he also he basically schooled his last opponent. Can't remember what his name was, but I think he dropped him in that fight as well. Very good and decisive victory for Abubakar, who was largely able to utilize his gas tank more than Gadzhi was in the third round. Oh boy, these boys came out banging. That's all about I can say for that fight, for the first round. Every time Krylov tried to come in, Oezdemir was able to lay those hands on him. Krylov tried to shoot in, the attempt got stuffed, and Oezdemir just walked him down into another takedown attempt where he sprawled on the takedown and circled back into the takedown, which was the stupidest thing he could have done. The fight made its way back to the feet again, but I will never understand fighters who crack their opponents and shoot in instead of trying to finish them. Krylov did that. Another famous example was when Kelvin Gastelum kicked Israel Adesanya in the head and then tried to shoot him for a takedown. But Krylov was able to succeed in this grappling exchange and almost choke out Oezdemir with a rear naked choke before Oezdemir just stood up, word to Derek Lewis. However, the spirit of Derek Lewis's hot balls didn't stick with Oezdemir, though, as Krylov was largely able to control Oezdemir on the ground, mixing his striking and grappling pretty well after getting Oezdemir to fear the takedown threat. He'd throw a combo to get Volkan's hands up, takedown. Combo to get Volkan's hands up, takedown. It was a very solid win for Nikita Krylov, especially after that duo of weird fights, where he beat up the carcass of Alexander Volkanovski and then just got embarrassed by Paul Craig just pulling guard on him. This fight reminded me of Belal's performance against Diego Lima? The Lima brother that's in the UFC, where he just pressured him up against the cage and just put that volume on him. It's impressive how Belal is able to play the role of the aggressor and the counter striker, fight to fight, being the guy on the inside of the warning tracks and the guy that's on the outside circling out. Belal would jump in with some combinations and ended a whole lot of them with uppercuts up the middle. It's pretty obvious the corner expected Brady to shoot more than he did. The striking was actually pretty even. It seemed like Brady landed a punch for every punch that Belal landed. Belal tried this one step-up high kick with the lead leg from the orthodox stance over and over again. I don't recall him ever throwing that in his other fights, but I don't know, maybe a new tool that he wanted to show off. Belal had lights-out takedown defense and was largely able to just bully Brady into the cage wall, throwing 2-3 punches at a time. Brady showed some promise. He was able to land a few punches here and there when Belal stepped into range, but he just got big brothered in there. Belal nailed him with an overhand left, and it was just the beginning of the end for Sean. With Muhammad emptying the gas tank and just swarming Brady for the finish, who just showed no grit. It was like when you'd watch Brock Lesnar, this huge hunk of a man, just get hit with one punch and then have all of his skill and determination and heart go out the window anytime he got cracked with anything substantial. The finishing sequence, I think maybe 5 punches landed out of the 20 that were thrown, but Brady was just not fighting back, not defending himself with any sort of skill, just turning and running and closing his eyes and just trying to frame out. So it was a weird stoppage, but a warranted one. The first round was, all the rounds were pretty competitive, but both fighters are pretty long for their divisions, and they largely use their leg reaches pretty well. Fiorot used the oblique and side kicks pretty well with that lead leg. She'd be circling around the outside before stepping in and using Chookagian's forward momentum to just impale her on the kick. The fight honestly seemed like a mirror match. They were both largely using the same weapons on the feet. Just visually, they looked pretty similar. Fiorot kept using that lead hand, right overhand punch because Chookagian kept trying to circle to her left away from Fiorot's left rear power hand, and she kept catching her with it for the most part. Both fighters largely relied on their lead hands and feet. Not many punches or kicks were thrown with the rear weapons unless it was a 2-3 strike combination. But the oblique kicks were bothering Chookagian in the third round. She kept raising her lead leg up and not really using it as a feint. Didn't use it to close distance, hop in on it or build any strikes off of it. It just seemed like it was a preemptive defensive movement. Honestly, a really good and solid start to the card, but Fiorot really used that lead leg to great effect, jamming the distance between them when Chookagian tried to close distance on her, and just overall frustrating her with her ability to stay at range and jump in with combinations whenever she needed to. The fight started off quick. Gamrot set the pace for the fight. He threw a straight right and shot in right away, but Dariush was able to defend it. There was a whole lot of grappling in the first round, but the great thing about watching these two, and largely it seems like most of their fights that involve heavy grappling are always banger. You know, Dariush versus Carlos Diego Ferreira, Dariush versus Gamrot, Gamrot versus Carlos Diego Ferreira, Gamrot versus Chookagian. Those were all fights that involved some very fun grappling. There was never a moment between these two where one was ever settled in a dominant position for more than like 3 seconds. A lot of funk rolling from Dariush, rolling for legs from both guys, beautiful reversals, and just supreme grappling from both fighters. And the best part was that the striking was almost just as good. Dariush took some time to warm up into the fight, get his distance down, but man, once he got into it, it was pretty much lights out takedown defense and the implementation of his own game. Gamrot tried everything he could to get the fight to the ground, and Beneil just shut it down. Gamrot tried shooting doubles, Beneil sprawled. He shot in low singles and ankle picks, and Beneil just stuffed ahead and limp-legged out. There was an insane sequence where Gamrot shot in for the low single, got it stuffed, pulled guard, entered the deep half, and tried a leg lock, but Beneil just defended all of it. Gamrot beautifully chained together takedowns and submission attempts, and Beneil just shucked it all off. Really makes you think how he would have performed against Islam or Charles. I think he was actually scheduled to fight both of them at some point in time, but the fights were scrapped due to injuries or COVID or whatever reason. I'm surprised Beneil didn't try to use the Kimura sweep or the Kimura takedown defense when Gamrot had his back on his feet. Considering how often they ended up in that position in the first round, Benny was also chewing up that leg and body. It was kind of sadistic. Like Beneil would throw that outside leg kick. Gamrot would get tired of absorbing it. He would switch stances, and that would open up the opportunity for Beneil to throw the open stance body kick on the same side, right under the elbow. Gamrot kept trying to set traps on the feet to get Beneil to overcommit in the second and third rounds, but Beneil seemed to steer clear or see them coming from a mile away. The last 2 rounds were just complete shutouts for Beneil for the most part. Gamrot wasn't able to get the grappling going, and Beneil largely neutralized the striking. Gamrot needs to learn how to stop throwing kicks from striking range. First, he got bombed down by Arman and dropped, and then Beneil hit him so hard that the arena sounded like a goddamn hit marker. The man just needs to learn from his mistake. But Beneil deserves to fight for the title. Volkanovski should fight Cejudo if these featherweights can't figure out who's next in line or something. But yeah, Beneil looked sharp. Like he did not look like the guy that was throwing caution to the wind against guys like Drakkar Klose or Carlos Diego Ferreira or Scott Holtzman, right? Was that guy? He looked sharp and elite in this fight. Sean did surprisingly well in this fight. He had the obvious speed advantage on the feet, and he was able to deal more, in my opinion, he was able to deal more damage in rounds 1 and 3, which did give him the win in some judges' eyes, as Yan was able to take him down, but he didn't really do any lasting control or damage with it. He just tried to stack Sean's hips and use the can opener to try to pass guard. Sean had surprisingly good grappling defense. He was able to retain and regain guard pretty well, base up, and use the fence to work his way back up to the feet. But Yan did a pretty good job of exploiting the fact that Sean squares his hips up along the cage all the time, which is an advantage for Sean because it allows him to scoot around the cage against guys with no cage craft, but it's bad against guys who know how to cut the corners and shoot takedowns, which is surprising that Yan didn't exploit Sean's god-awful defensive cagecraft and corner him against the cage to pick him apart. Somewhat surprisingly, Sean really held his own against Yan on the feet, and he seemed to have a pretty considerable speed advantage, like I mentioned before. And to everybody's surprise, Sean had a beautiful duck under at the end of the first round that caught pretty much everybody off guard, and had me thinking for a moment there, what would happen if Sean won the fight based off of takedowns? There was a moment where O'Malley got hit with the outside trip, like how Zabit used to do. The one where you just step in and you push the opponent's shoulder back with your lead hand while getting your lead leg behind their legs and sweeping backwards. So you force them on their back. Sean got up quickly from that and tried to do the same thing to Yan, which was quite hilarious because he failed. On the feet, however, Yan got cracked with an overhand by Sean, but Yan was able to get his get back and got Sean back with an overhand of his own literally seconds after. Sean had a lot of success on the feet though. He's able to crack Yan with head kicks and a huge step up knee at some point that cut and wobbled Yan, but Yan got his licks in too. Sean got dropped at some point. Yan was able to slam in a whole bunch of body kicks as per usual for his fights, but it was very shocking that Yan didn't try to corner him given what other lesser fighters were able to do to Sean. If you look at the Moutinho fight, it seemed like Yan should have been able to replicate the brief moments of success Chris had, but better given the skill gap between the two, just backing Sean up and kicking the trailing leg and just bullying Sugar around the octagon. But man, turns out the Poodle had some dog in him, more than we gave him credit for. Sean either came in with a perfect game plan and didn't stick to it, or had like 70% of the perfect game plan cooked up, because in moments he was able to freeze up Yan in his high guard with the stutter steps, the multiple jabs and body shots in those moments. Interesting to see that, you know, the hype train, Sean O'Malley, was able to make the best boxer in the UFC panic shoot from halfway across the cage. Sean O'Malley proved that he deserves to hang with the elite of the bantamweight division, and I don't know if this is an exposure or a fraud check of Petr Yan, but I was very surprised at how many openings Sean gave Yan, and Yan just didn't capitalize as much as he maybe would have in the past. This was just a straight wrestling match at the beginning. Dillashaw, apparently Dillashaw came in with a shoulder injury where he was he claimed to have dislocated his shoulder 20 times in the training camp, and during the first takedown attempt he tried to post after already being in the motion of being taken down, and it seemed to have dislocated his shoulder. But Aljo just took him down off a kick, took his back, and just held him there with that body lock for all of the first round. TJ tried to scramble, but Aljo just circled around to his back and held his back like the human backpack that he is. Heavy ground and pound. TJ just kept trying to turn in, but Aljo is just so long. He was able to hold him there. The round ends. TJ's arm is just limping. He walks over to his corner, popped it back in his corner because TJ is just a savage. And I guess there's a difference between TJ, or there's a difference between the United Arab Emirates Athletic Commission and the Athletic Commission that watched over Aaron Pico's fights, because they let TJ continue. Once again, very grapple heavy in the second round after a few kicks exchanged from both fighters. But Aljo was able to throw in a Dutch choke on TJ. TJ fought out of it. The fight got back to his feet, and there was a moment where Aljo was kind of hoping that the ref would stop the fight. There was a moment there where TJ was like pulling down on his arm trying to pop it back in place, and Aljo hesitated to attack. He was just like looking at the ref to bail TJ out there. But Aljo ended up taking him down again and getting a TKO after some ground and pound. But you gotta feel sorry for both fighters, because idiots on Twitter are gonna be like, it was an injury, a healthy TJ washes Aljo, and TJ probably has to go back under the knife again. I mean, I can only imagine he tore his labrum pretty badly, probably messed up his long bicep tendon, because I believe it attaches to the labrum, and Lord knows what kind of damage he sustained to his rotator cuff muscles. That shoulder will never be the same again. This fight was just insanity from the first moment. Islam hurt Charles right off the bat with a left hand, which was insane. Oliveira was either really hurt or just wanted to prove a point and pulled guard almost immediately after the first striking exchange. and threatened a triangle, but Islam was able to, once again stack the hips and fight the other hand in and just end up staying on top. But Oliveira got his feet on Islam's hips and just pushed him off, like pressed him off, like how Gilbert Burns did Khamzat Chimaev in their fight, and clinched Islam against the cage, and Islam just put him on Air Dagestan and threw him. Forced his head up against the cage and guard and basically nullified it because Oliveira had no room to operate. Oliveira must have felt another level of pressure because he didn't even try to open up his guard after the second takedown. He just held him there until the end of the round. The horn sounded, and my first thought was, someone give that horn a Cialis. It was so weak, sounded so weird. But the second round started, and there was a lot of wall install in the second round. Islam had like double unders on Charles and was just pressing him up against the cage and was largely unable to take him down against the cage there. But when they separated and got back out to distance, Islam's left hand was not missing. His defensive footwork was giving. If you watch my video, my film room video on Islam, I talked a lot about his check hook and his defensive footwork, and I talked in my prediction video about how Islam's footwork and hip pressure were going to give Oliveira a lot of problems. I almost called that fight down to a T, except for the part that I didn't think he was going to drop him like that. Charles threw the cane kick. Makhachev angled out and just hammered in a check hook. Like I said, I had heavily emphasized Islam's defensive footwork and his check hook, and nobody believed when I said that Makhachev was going to make Charles's striking pretty much a non-factor in this fight. For the judo throw that Islam hit in the first round, he waited until Charles threw a knee, and as soon as the leg landed back on the mat, Islam hit the throat. It's insane how much of a difference in levels there was to this fight. Islam dropped Charles with the lead hooked and just pounced on him. Avoided some up kicks, pass guard, held him in half guard, which I believe I talked about this in my film room video as well, about how Islam actually favors working out of the half guard because he's just so long with his torso and his legs. You're able to basically just staple your opponent's spine down to the ground at both ends. But he set up the arm triangle from half guard and was able to finish it in the correct manner. And that's all she wrote, man. And new UFC champion of the world. Khabib got to pay Islam because he just protected his legacy there. If Charles won, people would have been saying that he was the lightweight GOAT and questioning whether or not Khabib would be able to beat him.